Hey everyone, thank you. So I'm Stephen Robinson. I do a lot of these Wonkette chats with my colleague Robin Panakia and others, and we focus a lot on the crazy political world and all and so forth. And something I kind of wanted to do was to sort of talk to folks in my other field of work in the arts regarding, the past couple years, post COVID, what the impact on this a livelihood for so many people and a way of life, and where we are now. Um, and who I have with me is David Glass, Kate Kraay, who I have the pleasure of having been working with recently. Um, and I usually with this I let folks introduce themselves. So David, please tell the folks watching about yourself and what you've been working on.
Okay. Hi. Well, my name's David Glass. I sound English, but actually I'm American, believe it or not. That's the first. That's the first
It's
mask.
true. I've seen his passport.
Really, but I'm constantly moving around, and I've been very fortunate to work in about 74 countries around the world. Also, to have been around at a time of enormous change, in a way, in theatre, which was that period in the 70s when I was studying in Paris, and then because I didn't really study in UK, and this has a bearing on terms of how you train. And so my background is more with a theatre school called the Jacques Lecoq School. I also worked with Etienne de Creux, who was a kind of mime teacher, corporeal mime, and then also with Grotowski and Peter Brooks. I was kind of in contact with some very interesting people, although at the time I was like any student, just probably a very bad student, and doing all sorts of naughty things. But it was a very interesting time. But it was also historically a very interesting time. Talking about the politics of great change in Paris was a time of enormous upheaval, and there were many people in exile living there. One of them was also Auguste Boal, who I spent time with as well. And so there was a great political and social upheaval in the 70s in both UK and France, of which I was a part without quite realizing it, which was the birth of punk, I suppose. And then also I was very fortunate to get a bit of money to go and study at the Alvin Ailey School in 1980. And so I was hanging around New York in 1980, where again I got involved in a kind of the kind of post-punk movement there as well, and met some fantastic people. So in a way, I was very fortunate to have come from a time of great change, and we're in a time of great change again.
Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Kraay. I realize I didn't put my last name on there, which if anybody tries to find me by just hearing the name Kraay, they're going to get very confused because it's spelled Kraay. Yeah, one of those crazy Dutch names. So I have been living in the Northwest for over 20 years now, and I've been an actor there for that long, based in Seattle, and sometimes down here in California, sometimes different places, but that's mostly where I've been. And I was part of the new MA Lab program at RADA in London, which was a physical theater devising program. And that was the first year in 2011, 2012. And one of the young women that I became really close to, Nuala Kavanagh, had always spoken really highly of David Glass. And I remember it made an impression on me and stuck with me. And then it was only just during the pandemic that he kind of came into the radar screen again, because he was directing a final exam play for those MA Labbers, as we would call ourselves. And it was, oh my God, David, the name. So Margot Monroe and the Nibelungliad.
That's right.
Was
they
came up with.
Really, really commercial title, that.
Yeah. And so I watched that, and then shortly afterwards, there was they had announced that David was doing a 6-week workshop in Athens called "The Alchemy of the Extraordinary," which it's like just put everything into a title and a name. And like it was the beginning of 2021. I had no idea if this was even going to be possible, but I decided to just go for it and got all the travel insurance possible, and had just a wonderful transformative 6 weeks there. And so that was how I got to know David. And I think one of the reasons that I I really wanted to introduce you to is that it was kind of helpful to come in at that time to talk to. So I'm trying to get this angle correct. To talk to David, because we all came in and we were all just happened to be women in that group. That was just kind of how it worked out. And it's just we've all just been through so much, like authoritarians taking over the world. Just so much tumultuousness happening everywhere. And we all had our flags held high, and or maybe our balloons held high, and then David proceeded to puncture holes into every one of them.
Awesome.
And it wasn't even that, I think we were all still held our beliefs and what we felt was true, but the idea of with theater itself and what is theater, and if you and it's something that when I left, the idea that if you try to just bullheadedly change the world with theater, then it's just going to more often than not can end up being propaganda. And
Absolutely.
so this idea that David would say that in theater we don't solve problems, we play problems, and I think that that's been a really helpful lens as we do go into this place where theater does really have to grapple with some things and habits that it's had for a long time, that things definitely do need to change, but how do you go about that, and how do you go about it in a way that is really kind of listening to the past and also listening to the future? So yeah.
Yeah, and that was definitely thank you, Kate, for that's a great touch on, because it was a sense of so much was happening. The what felt like potentially an extinction level event for a way of life for many of us.
Mhm.
What I really want to focus on was not to ever now on this side of it. It can feel like, oh, this will be this 2-year pause. But I think for a lot of us, it was, and I say this as someone who had majored in newspaper journalism and thought I'll be writing for newspapers forever. And you adapt. I do still write for a living, but not
Yeah.
what I 1992 or so era Stephen Robinson thought I would be doing. And it was like, is the world going to be changing similarly as to what the form was? And it was a very tough time at that point. And I know Kate and I had, I've always been a big fan of your work in Seattle when I've seen you, and we had the opportunity to work together at Cafe Nordo, a space in Seattle, and it was one of, if there's any sort of good thing from the pandemic, when our show at the time called Curiouser and Curiouser had, we were like a week out of tech in 2020, and then it closed. And when we thought maybe we could bring this back, there was some casting changes, and you came in, and we had the chance to work with you. And for anything I've ever worked on, we've had the pleasure to kind of be on this journey for a while. But the amount of change from when we kind of first sat down for reading together, I think it was, almost more than a year ago, and sort of the questions like, will we be rehearsing with masks, or how do we engage with the cast, how do we, to where we are now, where we were able to make changes where you're physically engaging with the audience, which is wonderful, and you do so well.
Mhm.
And you're really physically engaged with a scene partner in a great moment, the great Bo Mellinger, who's I'm a big fan of as well. And those are things that we never really, there's a period where we thought, are we going to be able to do that kind of work again? And I'm just very curious into your thoughts, Kate, of like that process, those questions, and for your craft as an actor, what you thought, like feeling your way through that process.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that's special about Cafe Nordo is its flexibility, and I think that they've been working more towards having that flexibility, and I think that that's just kind of the way to go, because I think that the kind of old subscription model, it's just it can kind of just locks you into a certain way of
Mhm.
being, and honestly, I mean, Norda does, doing some of that immersive kind of thing and just creating original work each time. But I also, I'm also really drawn to the work that David does, that I'll be doing with David, and that I have also done in the past, kind of where you're just independently devising, and you've got something that can grow and change and adapt to other things going forward. So I think that I really loved the fact that it was that you and Terry, as the playwrights, we were able to work together. You saw that if we were kind of really getting into clowning, that you could adapt and we could change things. I mean, this is, by the way, if anybody's listening, this is down the rabbit hole. So and originally it was Curiouser and Curiouser. So we had both this upstairs and downstairs, but I've been a lifelong, Lewis Carroll fanatic anyway. So I was,
Perfect for
a
this.
lot of ideas. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really freeing, I think, to have that flexibility. And I think where a lot of theaters have kind of become calcified, and there's the creatives, or I should do this way, creatives, and then there's the administration, like everything has its own department. Nobody ever talks to each other. And it's pretty deadly.
Yeah, and that had been my experience. I've knocked around administrative side and also the creative side, and there was a chance of the other sort of changing and kind of growing. And you know, what about you, David? Your experience for the past 2 years, when kind of looking down the sort of the unknown period with the pandemic, was there a sense of thinking of will I have to change what I'm doing? Will I wait it out? Like, just do you mind kind of walking us through what you were thinking at the
No,
time?
so it's a great question. It's a really great question. I think because it's already history in a way, and I just look back on it, and although we're still in the middle of it in a way as well, I just go, for me, there's only two kinds of change. There's change that happens to you, and there's change that you create, and then there's also a mixture of those two things. And I think change is really a test of our creativity. We are creative because it's our nature to be creative, not because we study to be creative. And in fact, the time of greatest change is when we're children, not just because the reason you create security around children, i.e. Their lives are lived in a kitchen and a living room for the most part, and occasionally go out shopping. When they're very small, you keep that security because basically they're changing massively. And I think on one level, of course, it's tragic what has happened to many people's livelihoods. The other part of me goes, these were all changes that were absolutely on the cards anyway. In other words, people were tired. I tell a story. I've told the story a few times of my company was at a festival in Istanbul where Robert Wilson was performing one of his kind of opuses, which cost sort of 17 zillion. And I couldn't help myself. I was doing a little piece of rubbish called La Dolce Vita, which I first be a musical version. And I went up to him, and my cousin had worked with him. And I went, "Hi, Bob. It's great to see you. I guess you'll be working on the piece you just opened with." And he said, No, I've got to go to work with Louis Reed in New York, in Berlin. I said, no, it's really terrible. It's boring. And people are walking out. And he said, oh, no, they're not walking. They're walking out because they don't get it. And I said, no, they're bored. They're really bored. Rubbish. And I go, and you see, and then meanwhile, I'm getting kind of like people in Gucci suits trying to pull me off. And I'm going, no, it really is terrible. And you owe it to your actors. And I knew a few of them, and he didn't even know their names, right? Now, I love Robert Wilson's work as well as anybody, but that time is well and truly over. And this embracing of trying to impress people rather than move people. For me, theater is something you're moved by. That's the most important thing. And if you remove from theater all the trappings of importance and reviews and money and power and all the rest of it, it becomes a beautiful game. And we've still got that beautiful game going. It's just that we have to rethink it almost in every possible way. But we would have had to do that anyway. It was changing. The very fact that I had, as we came out of this COVID, in the middle of it, I had faced with 10 fantastically talented and very powerful women was telling me something synchronistically, which is maybe shut up a bit, David, and listen to what these women have to say. As Kate goes yellow there for a moment, it was like it was a wonderful moment for me, and I think being alive to these moments is really what we have to be. But it's a long way around answering this. Is that these changes were all going to happen anyway. I think COVID just has brought it absolutely to the surface.
Well,
And
absolutely. I totally agree. I know there were certain conversations, I think, on the administrative side prior to COVID about the place in theater and so forth. And I'd get in a lot of kind of heated discussions, all good natured, about a sense of what I would view as defeatism, the sort of the sense of, oh, audiences don't get theater anymore. They only want, big budget movies, or they want spectacle or so forth. And, I totally agree with you. It's people don't necessarily want to be impressed so much as moved. People always want stories. So whenever I would always kind of have to push back, if anyone's sort of telling me that people don't want stories or to be in a space and share that experience with people, I disagree. Like, maybe it's how we're trying to reach people and what's been happening. And I think something I kind of took away from the experience, at least for myself, was that what really people missed so much was that sort of being together and sharing something and being moved by it. And for myself, working at writing for Nordo, it was always that's totally like so many of our, it was kind of a reunion for a lot of people when they're coming to see the show, was to sort of, because it's, you're fed during the courses, and it's a kind of something that had been taken away from a lot of folks, like just being in a space together with friends and drinking and enjoying something and entertaining something. To have that back was wonderful. And I feel like that was what the key is. And it doesn't mean that you can't do anything profound, because I feel like movement is profound and joy is profound. But I'm kind of, as a sort of Shakespeare geek, the one to always be like, it's funny. He had a clown. He'd have a clown during Macbeth who comes on and lightens the mood. And then there's grand stakes and emotion. And that's what got me as a kid into it.
Yes. If I don't want to interrupt, but you've got me kind of excited here. And it's because the thing about Nordo is that it's different and it shakes you up and it's interesting. So this is, I'll have to tease David a little bit because he spends a lot of his time in the UK. He's very proud of, being an American with the passport. But there's the thing that I experience is that we have totally divided histories in theatrical histories in the US and Europe in the 20th century, specifically, not the longer history. And so there's a lot of things that we have just been really stuck in, I think, over here, and it's been that way since the House Un-American Activities Committee, in my opinion, in the 50s, if you can believe it. I mean, that's what kind of created this dividing line to sort of acceptable deadly theater, and then there's a sort of lower guerrilla fringe theater, and never the twain shall meet, and so whenever I would go to Europe, and I would just see, I just felt like things were the history there. Like, so here we had the group theater, things were really getting kind of interesting in the 30s. And then there was a huge clampdown in the 1950s. And then it's kind of all sprung from there. But meanwhile, they had, as David knows, they had Grotowski, they had like all of these things that were happening post-war in Europe, which was from an entirely different perspective. And so there was just a lot more, in my opinion, a feeling of like, we have to use theater to wake people up. It has to be alive. And it is in many cases, I find, and I love text, and dialogue theater, but I find that sometimes like musicals are just much more alive here in the US than I find so many talky plays that like, I agree with everything they're saying, but then at the end of I just don't care, and so this idea that you can that you've got to use every part of your body, you've got to use every part of your senses in order to wake people up now, when people are enthralled to electronics, to what have you. You know, you have to do that, and it's something that I just feel like we've still been really slow moving about.
Absolutely. And I've sort of had to, the opportunity, the gift of learning to say less, and to trust actors more. And it was never like that I didn't trust actors as a writer, and working with, uh, most recently with Jasmine Joshua, they're a wonderful director and great comedic talent, and was sort of freeing me to like, what you have is funny. It's there. You don't need four more jokes. They can take it further. Because for me, I always feel like I don't want to. I feel a certain obligation. I don't want to put some years. I'm putting this person out there. Like if it doesn't work, I can sneak out the back. You know, you know. But they're on stage. So I want to like give as much as I can. And instead, it's like, well, no, no, no. They can, the actors can do so much, or even just the two lines. You don't need the six. And that's
Yeah.
something I've been learning and trying to do more of like the collaboration of like what they do, and help them to sort of, you say, use every part of yourself to deliver on that. And it's been, so much fun, like, on this particular project with Nordo, with you, of what you were able to sort of do, when we're doing both shows at the same time. We were doing a version of, Through the Looking Glass and Down the Rabbit Hole, and Kate was playing two different characters going back and forth,
Sure.
and it was
It's so
quite
fun.
athletic achievement. But you were playing the White Knight, which was a great clown role, and we discussed this of how this audience, you came in and the audience would just connect with you immediately and cheer your triumph, like when you defeat the evil Red Knight for the evening. You're just there, so connecting. And so to have, to me, that's everything. Just to have all these strangers in a room, they've met this weird kind of person, you connect with them and sort of share that a triumph of
That's
the
the
underdog
moment.
briefly.
That's it. That's all it is, right? It's just that moment, that you have together with the audience, and in my opinion, and then everything else is extra, and then you can, yeah. David, you're thinking about
No, no,
something.
no. I was saying, I mean, I loved watching Kate. I loved meeting Kate, and I don't think I'm blowing smoke anywhere. That's polite to say at the moment. But I think that she's a very interesting performer, because she's what I would call she's like a cross between Meryl Streep and sort of Phyllis Diller. And she's got these.
I like that.
She's got these
Oh, yes.
these piercing dark eyes when she looks at you. And also she's always got a look on her face which says that she's something in her mind is naughty. Whether she has or not, I don't know. But I always trust people whose mouths are open more than they are closed. And it's very important, this, because when we open our mouths, we actually receive the world more. We kiss, we taste, we eat, and all the rest of it. And Kate had that the moment she walked into that room, where I thought, hey, there's a beautiful naughtiness here, a misbehavior. I mean, I think we need to learn to misbehave again, which is very important in theatre as well. I think what you're saying about stories is, I think we've gotten, I think in both countries, America and England, stuck in this idea of what I call natural realism. And, even Stanislavski said he didn't think realism was possible, really. It costs so bloody much to make something naturalistic. And luckily, because I've worked in so many different parts of the world, many parts of the world couldn't care less about things being real. In fact, if you said, we're going to do a play about reality, you said, I don't want to know about that. That's my, it's really bloody boring. Guess what's boring? But I think what's wonderful about theatre is it's a game. It's a beautiful, my teacher, Lecoq, said, it's a jeu, it's a play. You play and you pretend. And I think one of the things I try to teach is that we, in the arts, but particularly in theatre, we evoke worlds through the imagination, and we provoke the audience, which is you don't ask the audience to laugh, you make them laugh. Yes, you provoke them. And if you're lucky, you might invoke certain ideas that are fundamental to human beings. But because it's a democracy of the heart, we each of us come with different stories. So, you could be sitting next to somebody who fell in love with their mother when you go to see Oedipus now. You know what I mean? In other words, the chorus is not on stage, it's in the audience, because we live in very diverse, and so people bring their own thoughts to theatre. And then all you have to do is entertain those thoughts in a given direction. I think one of the biggest illnesses we're all suffering from at the moment is thinking that we're going to solve the world with theatre, and we ain't. The world is it was broken to begin with, and it's pretty broken now, and it'll only get more broken. But I promise you this, when the water's going up to our neck, we'll still be telling stupid fart jokes and things. Pretty sure that's so. In fact, it's true. On our last day in Athens, we're having our party at the end. Literally, the hills were burning around us and ash was falling, and still we were telling stupid jokes and dancing. I've got a film of it to prove it. And I go, well, that's why we're actors, because, you know what I mean? And that's a beautiful thing, a terrible and beautiful thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one great thing about writing with Cafe Nordo is Terry Podgorski and Aaron Brindley, the co-artist directors. We've always said, people have to eat between. So essentially, it needs to be a certain level of a good time, even though we've joked about potentially doing Animal Farm and serving people the animals who died between the courses or whatever. But generally speaking, you want it to be a little bit uplifting. And that helps you to sort of, what's the feeling we want people to come away from when they're here? It doesn't mean that it has to be empty or lesser art. And I feel like that's a struggle some folks have. They want to do, it's important, and it's only important if there are certain, and I think something could be high stakes.
Importance is so heavy.
Yeah.
It's this heavy cloak that people sometimes wear. It's like something they have to prove to their fathers,
Yes, this is worth my doing. This is an important job. And, I think it's because of my sort of, not double life, but, I write a lot about politics. I try to make it funny, but what often happens is this sense of with different folks in theater or whatever. And especially I think during the pandemic, so we were away, and during the pandemic, especially in 2020, there was essentially plague, social unrest, and there was some folks were like, oh, when we come back, we must have the plague play, and then we must have the racial unrest play. And I was like, oh my God, like no one wants to see that. And it doesn't mean that they are simple-minded or whatever. It's just that that's kind of like not, well, for me, it's like, where do you find the joke in that? And not like an acute, where do I find the way of because that is the human experience. Our human experience is, for me as a writer, it's like our life is never all just tragic and all just, comedic. It's often some of the worst moments in our life. There's something funny that happens. There's a funny moment during a funeral, and then during a wedding, that could be a tragic, ridiculous moment. And so to try to find the balance is, to me, producing more of the human experience.
Well, it's like, sorry, I'm flashing yellow, but it's probably too far away from. But it's like Dario Fo, right? Like he's talking about real things that are just absolutely ridiculous in his country, but it's a way that we can all, you can all kind of go through that and see the truth of it without it having kind of this heaviness about it. And I'm going to stop the camera just for a second so I can
figure this out.
And you guys but I'm still here.
No, it's like radio now with Kate, but Kate has a very compelling voice, so it's but so has anything about your work changed? Would you say that you said that change was already, and you're someone who adapts change in your life?
I suppose it's always is. I mean, I'm trying to think. During the piece I made during the first bit of lockdown was a piece I've been thinking about for a while. It's a piece called Silence. I was originally a mime. I was a street mime for 2 years in the street. So there's a piece called Silence, and it was really about the world's greatest avant-garde director. His name is Wilson Tyrannosaurus Speculum. And it was basically about the longest technical rehearsal ever done in the Sturmhaus in Berlin. And he was doing an opera, a minimalist opera, using vast amounts of resources. And he basically gets the audience to shoot him on stage at the end of the first act. The second act takes place in the reception of the Arts Council, where he's waiting to hear about some money he's going to get from the Arts Council of Paradise, as it were, and he gets rejected, but as does Alfred Hitchcock and Frida Kahlo, who also turn up for it. And the last part is he gets his brain again by an actress who he basically said, you should never act in your life, you haven't got the talent. He became a speech therapist, and she teaches him to talk again. And so that was the piece I created, and I actually created it. So it's basically about an old white director being killed by the audience at the end of the film. But when I think about where we were at the time, I thought, yeah, well, that's kind of what's going on. It's great. And then I got Tom Morris, who's an old mate, who did War Horse. He was the director of War Horse, to help me. And Julian Crouch, who's another old white guy, who is a designer who did Shock-Headed Peter and has worked at the Met. And then and Mike Alfreds, who's one of the sort of great mentor teachers of many people, to help me with this story about an old white director being killed by the audience. And I thought, no, this is great. And so I'm doing it more now. And it's also, I could do it alone to begin with, but now I've actually got a woman who's playing the stage manager in the first part, Mortgage, and she ends up kicking me in the nuts during it. And then the second part, she plays the receptionist. And then the last, she plays Olga, my nurse, who heals me, as it helps to heal me. And that was my way of, in a way, trying to work because I could, but also it began to, without realizing it, reflecting absolutely what was going on at the time. But it was never conscious. I didn't sit there and go, right, I've got to take my plug and fit it into all these issues. In a way, theatre is not an issue, it's a story.
Absolutely.
You know, and as soon as you make it an issue, then you're reading The Guardian. And also, I say this after 45 years of doing theatre, most of the things you will learn from any play, you probably know by the time you're 8 years old. Okay, if you ask an 8-year-old, you got your older brother is going out with a girl from a family that no one likes, i.e. Romeo and Juliet. Is it going to work out? Well, no, it ain't. Your average 8-year-old never ask your daughters how they love you. 8-year-old will go, yeah, don't ask that. Okay, and so don't try to teach the audience, engage and entertain the audience. And there's many different versions of that. And be playful and fill it full of lifefulness. It doesn't matter if it's tragic, just so it's full of life. You know what I mean? The pleasure of King Lear holding his dead daughter in his arms, he should be so overjoyed to be holding her in his arms as he plays this. And from that, you know, Leonard Cohen was full of terrible grief, and it was so wonderful to hear him so miserable. It's beautiful. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's black or white. It's a full of elan, full of life.
You'd mentioned Hitchcock and Crossing. I'm a big fan of his, and I think a lot of what I just call them the wrong man, wrong person or wrong woman, because I love to do something either with a female lead in that world. But what's identifiable is the idea of you're being swept up in this exciting, exotic life. And that's the way it's, to me, it's North by Northwest interesting because it starts with Cary Grant being kind of the average audience member who then gets to be Cary Grant. He's put in this dramatic, exciting experience. And I think a lot of the fun sort of plays or any sort of story is that opportunity where you're kind of identifying with someone who's going off on this grand experience or something. And I feel like there was a sense of period of like, well, no, everything needs to be without catharsis, because that's the real world. And again, I kind of push back on that. I was like, no, I think the real world does have those opportunities for grand excitement and themes and fun, you know, as you said, be playful, have fun with it.
Well, I think absolutely.
I was just going to say, the real world is much more interesting than we give it credit for in a lot of our
exactly. Yes, exactly.
renderings of it. Yeah.
I think that the thing is, for me, I don't really believe in avant-garde theatre. I don't believe in anything. I believe in good theatre and bad theatre. Either it entertains you, or it doesn't. And some people will be entertained more by certain things than other things. And also each story has its way of being told. So, you know, SpongeBob in SpongeBob's world is fantastically interesting, as is, you know, Irena in The Three Sisters, each in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, and again, back to, you know, Kate with Nordo, it's the opportunity, you know, you sort of putting on these, she has this wonderful outfit she's wearing, and the nails, as you would like to say, it's like the nails are sort of your idea of like, here, I know how the character is now, the nails and the hair. And it is a sense of, I always liked at Nordo where, because certain stories you're doing, when the cast will come out, the audience immediately is sort of, because it's already somewhat larger than life, the way they're dressed and engaging with them. And that's such a fun, whenever you see it happening, and when I'm there and watching, you see the audience go like, something's happening or whatever. So that to me is so much fun and so much
Yes.
of what this can do.
It's like when you're putting, you know, if you do mask work, and the idea is that it enlarges you. And what was I saying? You know, we just watch all these streams of information going by if we're scrolling, sitting somewhere scrolling. But I saw the Balinese, like the Thousand Arms dance, where they've got all of the women in the row, and the arms are coming around, and it's just dazzling. And if you sit back, you feel like, well, I'm watching a supernatural goddess. That's what's happening. And that's, you know, the gift of the human imagination is to expand that, not to contract it. You know, so you can look at like the worst of us, and you can look at the things that are real, but like if it's all just reductive, then it will just reduce, I guess.
Yes, and I think things are. I'm and David, I'm very like, you've resisted that, and Case resists that, because I was seeing a lot of that from what, you know, the response to the pandemic, and a lot of the larger political issues was to perhaps go more reductive, go more didactic, more like, we have to tell this important story about this without like. And it's interesting because, yeah, as a writer, I was like, well, I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm weird, but here's a potential humorous spin on like, it's a horrible thing, but at the same time, I walked into a rake. Like, humorous stuff happens during lockdown, or humorous things happen at a protest. It's not as serious and profound in life as people might think. And I think you've alluded to some of the larger political things surrounding theater, like the putting sort of structures on theater. And I'll start with you, Kate. Like, what are your thoughts? I mean, we obviously want to, as artists, democratize make things fairer, make the room safer for everyone to do better work. But, you know, how do we do that while also saying our job is to tell stories and not let that get into the way of the stories you're telling?
I think that's really important. I think what you have to separate is, and I know this because I was involved, I was on the Arts Council, speaking of Arts Council, for 14 years in England, this thing called the Arts Council. It's like the endowment, as it were. I was on the panel, and also parliamentary committees, about trying to get more diverse voices, Black and Asian voices particularly, given opportunities. We mustn't confuse telling a story with creating opportunity and giving power to that opportunity. These are two separate things in a way. So in other words, if you're kind of constantly saying, for instance, I want my Black friends to play anything they want to play a table, or if they want to play Juliet, fantastic, just do it really well. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, both because of socioeconomic reasons, often my friends who are Black in England won't easily go into the arts, or if they have, they are really finding it difficult because they have to fight their own families often, because their families have actually struggled hugely to be in that country. Now, I absolutely believe what we need to do is create greater opportunity for those kids to have their voices found, in the way that, in a way, my father was on the GI Bill. He would never have gone to university, but been to the GI Bill. And that is a political thing, and I will fight for that, and I have fought for it. It's a different thing, though. But then once you're in the room, let people from whatever background play whatever they want for me. The game of pretend is different from the game of opportunity. Does that make sense in some way?
Oh, absolutely. And I've been drawn to projects we can do that. I think that's the fun of the one that what
Yeah.
Kate and I'm working on. There's potential to sort of spin everywhere and find different avenues with. Yeah, I mean, again, and it's taking us all back to politics in a way, it is the idea of the inaccessibility of the arts in a certain way of, and I feel like especially in Seattle and cities like have gotten
Mhm.
more expensive, and I'm sure it's the case everywhere, but Seattle and in Portland where I am, it becomes harder for artists to sort of live
Yeah.
and to do what they do. And it's interesting in a weird way. I've had this discussion, I find, of I was talking to my wife about this. I would often find it weird how, the idea of accessibility was termed as very low ticket prices, and sort of saying the art is very cheap. And then, there'll be a fancy gala with people who make more than I do, but like my wife, my wife's a lawyer. So people who do make money like my wife, who then like deign to contribute a lot to the arts. And then it's sort of a still kind of, well, why are we doing it that way? And why I feel guilty if I'm like getting a great performance from someone for less than I should. Like, why am I not paying this up front? And what is the cost of this? Let's be honest about this and do it so that people can live. Like, I believe that it can work. I feel like that's been the larger debate, definitely on the administrative side where I've been involved, as defining what accessibility is, and then how to make art that the theater is because it shouldn't be sort of a charity where the artists are the ones,
Well,
sacrificing that
yeah,
people
the
can.
artists can't be the ones sacrificing. That's the thing. We
I'll
do
pay
see
more, like was fair.
Yeah, well, this is
Yeah.
another thing we really struggle with in the US because, other places and I know because David told me like it's going away, it feels like in the UK, but here, like, we basically lost most of the NEA under Reagan. So there is this idea more in other other places that you kind of you treat any art form as a precious part of your your civic life, and you support that. And we just have
Oh, absolutely.
a very weird, it's funny because I talked about the HUAC thing. My sister, who's a playwright, like you, and she actually does a lot of kind of the sitting in with the devising and kind of, so we'll talk. You just mentioned that earlier about kind of how to work with actors doing that. She does that a lot. But we are both fans of Anne Bogart, and Bogart's another Navy brat like us, and but has studied how you know the a lot of these issues go way back to our very Puritan beginnings, and like the first
Mm.
play that opened in Boston closed the next night in a court, and so there's a lot of things that we consider the arts to be extra, and kind of occupying a different sphere. So that already creates problems as far as access. Sorry, I don't want to get away from your question around that, but it's like so what happens is then like these individual theaters feel like they have to solve all of the problems that have come from society. And so
Mhm.
I think you do have to deal with some ticket price things. You do have to deal with some access, but you also really need to get opportunity of people who are represented on stage, because people are not going to come, if you just have white people on stage, you're just going to have white people in the audience, so it's like, right. So
We want
that's
to provide opportunities or roles for folks, opportunities for people to write. So opportunities for me,
yeah,
people like myself to write, but also diversity of
and to
opportunities.
produce, yeah, all of it, every, front and back.
But I think that the time is a very good time. I mean, I'm not a false optimist. I don't really believe in optimism, more pessimism. I believe in realism, and I think it is all falling apart, and it's a crazy time. But in that crazy time, what I do believe is the one thing you have to go back to is community. and community is rebuilt, recreates itself all the time. And so when you have a lot of destruction, you need a lot of destruction, you will have a regeneration is what's happening now. And regeneration you'll see in all sorts of places. I know that there is vast problems around wealth, people having wealth, people not, but community is what you need to create again. And what's great about the arts is, generally the arts, if you remove the kind of pomposity and the trying to impress with power, is we can all sing songs, or we can play music, or do dances and tell stories. Where you do that can change who can come to that. But guess what? There is a lot of wealth held up in property and people having ownership over places. To redeploy that, it's not, everybody knows this, it's not your property. You're here temporarily on earth. It's a great big lie. Capitalism is a beautiful religion that seems to prove itself, but actually, guess what? It ain't anymore. So in other words, when you begin to get artists from many different walks of life, some with lots of money and power tied up with their families, others with nothing, and they begin to work together, you might begin to create a new way of working, where wealth begins to get spread out again. And it's the most natural thing in the world. You know what I mean? And that creates community again. But you have to let go. You have to actually say, I don't need this much for my life anymore. I mean, I say this very obviously, it always surprises people. I pay myself £12,000 a year. Okay, I'm a socialist. I give my money to the rest of my company so that I can do things. Luckily, I paid my mortgage off after giving masses to the bank. But I believe it is possible to do that. Okay, and by doing it, you can employ people, you can take chances, and a little bit more of that would make a big difference. People letting go of a bit of their wealth.
Well, that's a definite Wonkette statement. So this is perfect for a Wonkette podcast for our
Right?
viewers.
I knew it would be.
And what Kate had been saying earlier about a subscription model, something that I've really believed in is, I feel the path is sort of building community. I think the former subscription model might have been a bit distancing, and I feel like what a lot of people want is sort of community. I remember meeting at one point, it's a place, it's a social club called the Rainier Club in Seattle, and I was at some event, theater event there, and there was a gentleman who just happened to be there, a young man, and he had moved to the city to work in tech, knew no one, and he says, I just want to meet people. So he joined this, relatively expensive social club. And I feel like, well, that would be great if more theater was that way. I think, again, what I really love about Cafe Nordo is it does provide that. And I think that is when you have a community space, it's not just about, the blue-haired ladies writing large checks for your kind of theater. It's about, no, this is where I go with my family. And part of that is, again, going back to Shakespeare, it's like, this is something I can bring my kids to, or this is fun. This is something where I associate this with my form of life. And I feel in a weird way, sports became that, but sports is a form of theater, right? So there's no reason why we can't do that, or will be as open of like people gather together for a shared experience. There's certainly, I think, potential to sort of do that as well.
No, I think that's right. And I think that also, I used to work occasionally in corporates to make money to pay for things. But if you ask people, what do you live for? They'll say, I live for the love of my children, to have food, to tell stupid stories, to sing songs. And you say, but do you live to have endless amounts of power? No, that helps me. So in other words, don't confuse the wire with the electricity. And the electricity you can never get rid of, and that's what's common to all life. There are a few completely mad people, but mostly people like food, storytelling, to be playful, to fall in love, to make love, all these basic things that theatre gives you. And that in this time of change, and that's also why, in a way, going back to my relationship to Kate, who I think is a fantastic maker, I'd love to also meet you more again now, is the idea of community, and not just community within one place like Seattle, but the way it connects across the world. It's both local and global. So we're inviting Kate to be in the Brides Project in the UK, and that this linking up to create doors and windows and bridges again when people are trying to build walls. It's the best thing that theatre does.
Wonderful. I guess we're getting close to time, but I just want to get from what do you guys have next, or what would you like to tell folks about that you're doing? Starting with you, Kate.
Thank you. That's a perfect lead-in. I'm like, let me give my plug for the workshops. So I'm very excited, and this all kind of happened kind of quickly because we wanted to be able to start to really get that community going and get people reconnected again. And it's something that David has done all over the world. So we have two workshops happening in Seattle at the end of this month. So there's a 6-day workshop which starts on the 29th, and that's a Monday. And it goes through Saturday, and that's partly at Base Experimental Arts, which is a great organization, a lot of movement, a lot of dance, and then partly at West of Lenin, which is my partner's theater. And then we have another 1-day workshop on Vashon Island, as Adam likes to say, the island of the hippies, with Umo, and is helping with that along with Open Space. It will be at Open Space, and so those are two separate workshops. Then it's kind of, again, that accessibility. Like, some people can't do a 6-day workshop, and they want to come in and just get what they can. And the idea is just to kind of get that perspective, just to see each other again and be in a room again and to play and to just like, what does it mean to just kind of like play around and be stupid? And so you can, if you go to, I think we've got that I don't know. I can give you things later if you're able to put that up, but we have.
Oh, yeah, so drop it in the.
That'll be great. We'll give that information, but really, really looking forward to that. And then learning more about this amazing production of The Brides in Europe this winter. And I got to last year, after doing the Athens workshop, I got to meet these wonderful Sienese women in Siena, Italy, who kind of had the seed of this idea. But I think David can probably say more about that. And he has a lot of other projects happening as well.
Oh, yeah, please. Well, bring us home, David. I'm excited to hear it.
Well, absolutely. I'm so looking forward to these workshops in Seattle, which is basically a devising workshop. Also, for anybody interested in creativity, it's actually a kind of a 5-stage creative practice that if you are interested in being creative, it's been used in lots of different places. So that's the first thing. But I'm writing my first children's book for a much bigger project called Galapagos. It's for Viking Press, with a wonderful illustrator, James Yang, who's American, Korean American, living in New York. And that's part of a big project, which is Galapagos, which is a show which has just been commissioned for Manchester International Festival and BAM in Brooklyn Academy. And that'll be also with music by Kate Bush, Peter Gabriel, and David Byrne. So it's a family piece, but large-scale theatre thing. So I'm kind of writing that in Los Angeles at the moment. That's what I'm doing.
Oh, so that's exciting. So I'm so happy to hear it and see more. I have an 8-year-old, so he's gonna dive right into to that book.
Your 8-year-old will tell you probably everything you need to know about life, basically. And
he actually does. He's going to be perhaps far better writer and creative type than I am. He's got it.
I love your posts with his little bon mots. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for coming and joining us sort of on this bonus Wonkette chat, and we kind of kinking with the arts, and this has been great. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Kate, you're going to be in down the Rabbit Hole at Cafe Nordo. We're coming back on the phone, right?
That's right. Yeah, so that begins, I think it's like September 16th or something like that. We go back, and then we do September through November for another big final run of that. And so might change things up more, not sure, but we'll see.
Please come see it. She is just wonderful, and it's a wonderful, wonderful cast. It's been so fun to see other people say the words. Yeah. It's sort of a luxury when something plays this long. So thank you. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.